Welcome to the MAM Journals. Today I'm going to be talking about the CB400F, or as we of course know it, the 404. I'll be talking about the specification of the bike, I'll be talking about what it was like to ride, I'll be talking about what you look for if you're buying one. But most of all, what I hope to get to the bottom of is why did a bike that's so well regarded technically only stay in manufacture for 2 years? Why did the Europeans love it and the Americans not love it at all? And are these bikes things that we can actually ride now, or are they just garage stroke museum pieces? I hope you enjoy the video. I think before we actually get into the details of this bike, we should perhaps talk about Honda themselves. They're a company that's engineering led through its history, and its two characteristics are engineering innovation and ambition. If I say that, give you an idea of scale, Honda sold 16.8 million bikes. European manufacturers that we all know, and big ones, sell hundreds of thousands, and companies like Triumph might sell tens of thousands in a year. So it gives you an idea of just how successful Honda are. To give you an idea of how important the American market has always been to Honda, certainly in the bike sector rather than commuter sector, which they dominate in other parts of the world. In 1959, when they set up their distributorship, at the same time as they actually set it up in the UK, a Triumph American distributor, there were 3 at the time, actually thought, well, I'll quietly go and see what these Japanese guys are thinking about. So he sat down with them and they asked him about their ambition, and bear in mind he was selling, as one of 3 distributors, he was selling 2,500 bikes a year, and he asked them, how many bikes do you think you're going to do? And they said 5,000, and he said, oh, that's a lot of bikes to do in a year, and they said no, a month. So that just gives you an idea of the ambition and scale and how important the American market is. In 1968, Honda launched the first, what we now term, superbike. They launched the Honda 754. It was a very impressive entry to the market, and indeed Kawasaki were so impressed by it that actually they canned their own 750 and went off and took several years to develop their 900cc, the Z1, which again became an iconic bike of the era. So if you want to know why you got a Z1, you've got Honda to thank for it. They continued to build bikes. They developed a 504, and indeed the predecessor to this bike was a 354, which was a bit slow and not quite got the charisma of this bike, but it shows that they were doing that development and evolution. This bike was launched in the 1974 Cologne show, and as I've touched on it, it had rave reviews from the journalists. Why did the journalists like it, particularly the European ones? Well, it was a little jewel of a bike, really. Beautiful engineered, stunning 4-into-1 exhaust, slightly different, more European style riding position, and a buzzy 4-cylinder engine that went up to 10,000 revs. It was compact. This apparently is a 31.5 or 31.1 inches tall, but I suspect inches were slightly smaller in those days, because it's certainly very easy for the more vertically challenged amongst us. It's a nice, compact, easy bike to ride. Anyway, let's go through the specifications of the bike. I always think that the logical place to start when you talk about specifications is the engine. It's an inline 4, it's an air-cooled 2 valves per cylinder, it's got a single overhead cam, and slightly unusual chain adjuster, which I'll talk about when I get to things to sort of have a look at. It's fitted with 4 20mm Cayenne carburetors. Most Japanese bikes at the time are either Mikuni's or Cayenne, and the bike is fitted with a 6-speed gearbox. So you can see the gearbox here on the side, slightly unusual with a 6-speed at the time. The bike is also fitted in terms of suspension. You can see it's got those tiny 33mm telescopic forks on it, and that's with a 26.5 degree rake, i.e. the angle of the front forks in relation to the vertical, and that's nowadays would be considered quite extreme. the bike is incredibly compact, so its wheelbase, i.e. the point from the contact points of the tyres, it's only 53.3 inches long. As I touched on in my introduction, it's allegedly a 31.1 inch seat, but it's certainly, probably because of the narrowness, in fairness, and the small nature of the bike, it's very easy to get your feet on the ground from it. The bike weighed 392 pounds dry, and I've seen a couple of data, they argue a bit amongst themselves as to what they think the weight is wet, but let's call it I'm going to go with 407 pounds with a gallon of fuel in it. In terms of brakes, it had a single disc, a 267mm disc, unusual measurement, on the front. As you can see, it's solid, as opposed to drills, which were introduced sort of later on with disc brakes. And as a result of that, it's let's call it an exciting ride in the wet. 160 at the back, rear drum. In terms of tyres on the back there, it's a 350/18, and on the front it's got a 300/18. In terms of performance, back in the day, motorcycle magazines were allowed to actually say how fast a bike went. Well, obviously nowadays they talk about power, but they don't talk about speed. And it was tested by Bike magazine, and it reached 103.8 miles an hour, with the description bracketed as prone. I suspect he was in his shorts and weighed all of 9 stone. It would upright, the bike did 93.5 miles an hour when it was officially tested. And funnily enough, I think this particular bike, I've not done it, but when I rode it, it still pulls its revs well. I'll be surprised if it doesn't still do 90 odd miles an hour. Now, for those that are inclined to ride 47-year-old bikes at more than 90 miles an hour, this bike is pleasantly original. It's a 1970 bike. The exhaust is original, the seats are original. If we come up and start looking at the bars, and those are the right bars, they're the right grips, and those levers are right. They came like that with the little black bits on the end. There's got a couple of little marks on it where it's obviously been lightly dropped. I know it hasn't been heavily dropped because the stops on the front yoke here are properly intact, no damage on them. So, but I think it's quite nice that it is so original. They came in 2 colours initially because they did an F1 and an F2, and they came in light ruby red, which is what this is, and they did a varnish blue, and then the F2 version came out, which was a candy red and a parakeet yellow. So if you've seen the yellow ones, they're the F2s. That's a very easy way of knowing what you're looking at. Another good way of knowing if you're looking at an early bike or a later bike is this bike has, you can see the rear pillion footrest is mounted on the swinging arm. Later on they came with a loop round here and a peg on that. A couple of people joked at the time that they did that just to add to the suspension, but they weren't being serious. So what was the bike like to ride? Well, the first sensation is of how small the bike it is. I used to have, as a younger man, 250s and all the rest, and they felt, actually Hondas, and they felt bigger than this. So it's a very compact ride. It's a very buzzy engine and a great sort of noise to it, with that sort of turbine-like build-up as it winds itself up into speed. It handles like a 70s bike, i.e. it tram lines, it doesn't like bumps. It's the speedo, obviously, on an older bike. There's little springs in these speedo that actually control the indicator on it. They do wear, so what happens over time, I had a 1977 Kawasaki Z1000 and did exactly the same. They do bounce, you can replace the springs and do it, but fairly accurate in terms of its indications. I use speed tests as you go in. Various villages have signs in which record your speed and then indicate it to you to encourage you to drive at certain speeds, and I use that actually to give me an indication of how accurate speedo is, and I did find it pretty good. And for handling, as I say, was very 70s. Brakes were 70s too. You pull a long way before you actually feel anything happening, but it was certainly in keeping with its time, because I don't want to suggest that for its period it wasn't a good handling and responsive bike, because it was. They actually raced these in quite a few of the Clubman series, and from memory I think that Ron Haslam, who is one of the UK's most famous racers, and he actually won the TTF3 in 1980 on a modified version of this, competing against some pretty fast 252 strokes, because that was the category of race that it was in. So certainly they could make them go, and Yoshimura did a lot of stuff, pistons and exhausts on them to tune them up, because it was that sort of a bike. So it was good fun to ride. It keeps comfortably, even 47 years on, it keeps comfortably with the traffic. And as I say, this particular bike pulls its revs well. You can probably still get to 10,000 revs on it now. I didn't quite get there, but pretty close to it. So I think that's quite remarkable how it buzzed along. So good fun to ride. So if it's such a nice bike, and the way I'm describing it, it was a nice bike, certainly for its time and period, why didn't it sell? Well, if the Europeans loved it, the Americans, I'm going to be kind, were indifferent. And what they didn't like about it was they felt it was too small, and the foot pegs were in the wrong position. They preferred something that was slightly more universal Japanese machine, i.e. their expectations were the pegs would be slightly forward and the handlebars would be higher. And it wasn't quite fast enough to really compete with the bikes that was in the market for the people that wanted the speed. The RD 350 Yamaha was faster than it, and 50 pounds lighter, and probably 20% less money. And KH 400 was another bike that was cheaper and faster. I think the only thing it really managed to sort of outsee in its baseline performance was the Suzuki GT380, which was slightly chubbier and slightly slower. So the Americans just didn't get it. They did try and change it. They did produce bikes which had the changed riding position, but they still took the view that didn't quite know what to do with it. Is it a touring bike? Is it a cafe racer? What sort of bike is? And it didn't sell. I would say that this bike is a bike for the connoisseurs, but was not a bike that the American bike buying public took to. So you might be thinking of buying one of these, and what I'll just sort of point through is a few things you've got to look for in terms of originality. This bike is largely original. There's one or two, maybe two things, but certainly one is the later bikes had the locking petrol cap on, but the earlier ones didn't, so somebody at some point has probably fitted that as a retrofit. Not a bad idea with the price of fuel nowadays, but certainly not how it came originally in the 1975 version. It's also quite important to understand where they came from. This bike is shown, it's a UK registered bike, but it's shown as being imported, although checking the chassis numbers on it and the engine number, it is originally a UK bike, and I couldn't understand quite why, if it's a UK bike, why it was shown as an import, but I got to the bottom of it by, fortunately they left the tax disc on it, and it was a UK supplied bike that went to the Isle of Man originally, and it's obviously came back from that because they have different registrations out there, so it was registered when it came back. So it is a European UK spec bike. Things to sort of look for really. I touched on this weird sort of cam chain tensioner, and indeed right at the beginning I said that Honda like to innovate, and they do really. You leave engineers for a little while and they're always having a fiddle to see if they can find a better way to do something. And if you can imagine what's going on with a cam chain, so you've got a chain coming round, in order to keep the pressure on that chain to make sure that it is right at the tension, there's a bow shaped pusher that's going against it. So if you think about a bow, most of the mechanisms that apply pressure as you would on the top of the bow to get the bend into the arc to put tension on the chain. Now, rather than just do that, Honda went the other way around and put the pressure from the bottom, but there's a sort of mechanism, a U-shaped mechanism at the bottom of the engine which you adjust from the front rather than adjusting from the rear, and that mechanism can get a bit catchy. There is a way of getting around that if it does catch, and you can just take out a slightly different bolt and then cheat with a screwdriver, but I think the fact that they didn't carry on with this design tells you that it wasn't perfect. The consequences of that is sometimes that blade, that tensioner blade, can actually wear, and in itself wasn't a problem, but the little shavings from it get into what is quite a small oil filter and can clog it up. So that's one thing to watch for, or to sense for, when you're looking at an engine. This one seems fine, and the other thing that blocks up that tiny little oil filter is if an engine's been opened, and if you're buying bikes of this age, some of them have had, they have been taken apart and put together, which isn't necessarily a problem, of course, as long as it's been done properly. And one thing I would look for if I was looking at one of these is make sure that they've used proper gaskets, not gasket seal, because that gasket seal on the other side, exterior, you can get them clean, but on the other side there's always going to be pressings where it's sort of the pressure of the cranks, and that washes into the oil filter and again blocks it. So keep your eye out for noisy cams and ill-adjusted cam chains as a result of a poor maintenance and not keeping it up together. The carbs themselves, obviously they're any force, they're fairly easy to work on, i.e. with a set of vacuum gauges and several hours of your life, you can actually sort them out for those people that are inclined, and they do go slightly out of tune, and I think you've got to be more careful of that with buying ones nowadays, to make sure, because of the amount of ethanol that goes into modern fuel, and that sat in carburetors isn't great. I have a simple philosophy. People tell me about what you can put additives in to take out the ethanol, but if you don't put ethanol in the first place, you haven't got to take it out. So I go out of my way to find fuel that is ethanol free, and you can get it in pumps in the UK. You just have to know which one you're actually buying. Esso Supreme, in most parts of the country, has no ethanol in it at all, and when you put it in for winter storage, clearly get the fuel out or put an additive in to make sure that you're not leaving ethanol separating in the carburetors to keep it up together. Things that often happen on bikes, because a lot of these bikes, particularly if you're buying something like this with 19,000 miles on, the only way you get 19,000 miles is you spend a lot of time stood in the garage doing nothing, and things like fork seals perish and need replacing, and I've just actually had these done for the owner of the bike. Straightforward, you can still get parts and availability. It's just a routine matter that needs to be attended to. Have a look at if you're looking at buying one, obviously have a look at the age of the tyres. There's a 4-digit number pressed on the side of the tyres. If you have a look, the first 2 digits tell you what week it was made in, and the last 2 digits tell you what year. So if you won't be surprised if you go and look at one that's been put up for sale. It probably hasn't done many miles on the tyres, but they will be rock solid, making wet weather handling even more exciting than it needs to be. So just bear in mind if you're buying that. This one's all been done. This has got new tyres, I say, new seals. In the UK, you can actually run a bike that's over 40 years old without an MOT and without tax, but make sure you do check it over before you ride it, just to make sure the brakes are together and it's capable of being ridden. You have to declare them as classics in order to achieve that status, but it's not a complicated process. I've did it on my Z1000 and it's literally just fill in the form and it's done. So nice easy bikes to work on, very straightforward. There's no liquid cooling or no valve adjustment. Is very straightforward and easy, 2 valves. So most people with a modicum of understanding could keep one of these bikes running in their garage and enjoy keeping up together, depending on your mechanical competence. But even if you're sending it to others, it's not an expensive bike to really fettle up together, but you do have to keep on top of it. All right, in terms of prices, and what their value is. Well, the most expensive one of these I've ever seen is definitely a museum piece, and I actually think I've seen it sold twice. I follow auctions and just sort of try and get a feel for what prices are going through. Now, Silverstone Auctions sold one of these recently with 1 mile on it, i.e. pushing it around, and they got, if I can just see, £15,975, which is the record for the price. But of course, I actually think the same bike went through in 2018 through Bonhams at 7,475. So it tells you that the market certainly got quite buoyant, quite heated in recent years. But you don't need to spend anything like that to get a sensible example. I've seen more recent searches just to again help me get a feel of the market. I've seen one at £4,000, and that was 31,000 miles, but not as original as this bike, and that was 4,500, I think, from memory. And I saw another one which I thought was a little bit ambitious, but a one owner F2 bike, that was £10,000 with 13,000 miles on, and looked quite nice. I think something like this is, if it needed all the tyres and everything else doing, you'd probably 5 something. I think actually in this condition, mostly original, and a good history to it, and with the more obvious things sorted, then I think this is probably maybe £6,000. So you're getting a lot of bike that can still be ridden. You could still take it to enjoy it at local bike shows and ride it out. I think you could probably do 1,000 miles a year on one of these and not affect the value of it very much. So I think it could actually be good fun and cheap, classic, rideable motorcycling. I'd like to just take this opportunity to express my thanks to, firstly, Steve Polden, who's actually, I've known over 40 years, and is a Suzuki and Royal Enfield motorcycle dealer now. But back in the day when he was working as a technician in a Honda garage, this was his bike of choice, and I knew it was. So I popped and see him and said, "Can you sort of relive any tales of what you found?" So thank you. And clearly had great fun. He put a Yoshimura exhaust on it, which you could hear from 4 miles away. So he would have definitely ridden it as fast as it could go, knowing Steve as I do. But he speaks very fondly of the bikes as they are, and a lot of the technical stuff that I've been talking about in terms of the cams and chains, that was thanks to him. So thank you for sharing his expertise. And I'd also like to thank the owner of the bike, David Watt, who has numerous bikes and cars, and mentioned that he had this, and I said, could I film it, because I know he's thinking about selling it. I said, before you sell it, can I actually just do a piece on it? And he very kindly allowed me to do that, so I'm grateful to him for the loan of the bike. I hope that you've enjoyed this short video, and I do hope, if you have, that you maybe be kind enough to press like or even subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it in that way. But regardless of any of that, ride safe, stay well.